It is no secret that finding a place to live in our province is a challenge for many people, with soaring rents and just a lack of housing. Add to that mix having to navigate a whole host of scams as you're looking for somewhere to live, and the process can feel a bit daunting. Joining us now is Robert Patterson. He is a lawyer at the Tenant Resource and Advisory Centre. It's a nonprofit providing free legal advice on residential tenancy issues. Robert, thanks for being here. We appreciate it. What are the most common scams that you are being warned or told that people are running into?
For sure. I think you can kind of group scams into one of two camps. Maybe the most common, the most classically you think of are sort of bait and switch scams. Someone who puts a deposit down for a place, maybe without seeing it, shows up and realizes, the landlord doesn't actually own that, I don't have a unit to rent, or variations on that. Perhaps someone looks at a listing, signs an agreement, shows up, and the unit that they're getting is not what's in the picture. So they're ultimately not getting what they're paying for one way or another. I think those kind of scams typically target folks who are moving from out of province or out of community, who may not have friends or family in the community who can check those places out for them, and also, it really preys on people's desperation, right? And just needing to find a place, who are willing to pay money without seeing the actual unit they're getting. So that's one of the reasons it's become more prevalent, I think.
Have you noticed an uptick in the number of people reporting that they're running into scams with you, possibly because of either inflation or cost of living or maybe even the pandemic?
I think there's certainly a rise in these kind of scams. I would also say there's also a rise in the other kind of scam that we kind of see, and that's the one we probably hear more about. That first issue is in many ways sort of like it can be hard to know the legal recourse to take against someone. If the scammer takes your money and runs, that's almost more of a criminal issue than it is a thing you can resolve yourself. Right. Whereas a lot of people, I think, are being put instead, maybe you sign a rental agreement and you get a place, but something about it is off. Something's fishy is happening. And I think in that case, we see a lot of patterns where, for example, landlords will try and set up tenancies to make tenants believe that the laws and protections we have in BC don't apply to them. They'll say, oh, this isn't really a tenancy, this is a sublet. I'm subletting it through my family member or corporation. Right. Something that actually doesn't really bear legal water, but it gives the impression that perhaps you're in a more tenuous place. And because you're in a more tenuous place, tenants are more worried about asserting their rights. They're worried about saying no to illegal rent increases. That sort of creates this whole other category where people who are sort of precariously housed it's almost like an ongoing scam. People not realizing that they have these protections, and instead it's being eroded. It's eroding affordability, it's eroding their security in their homes. And so that's, I think, also a huge problem. So
what's your major advice to people if they come to you or they're watching now and thinking, that's happening to me? What can they do?
Yeah, so for that second category, I think really important first to understand your rights as a tenant. Go to our website, tenants.bc.ca, call the residential tenancy branch, get some information, basic information on how, what rights you have. And then if you want to take steps to assert those rights, there are advocates at places like TRAC and also across the province that can provide some advice or even representation, in asserting that level of defense. I would say too, for tenants in that first camp who may have found a place or aren't sure when they're setting out to try to find a place, really important as always to do your due diligence, try and get to the unit yourself, do a land title search on the property to see if you can get the name of the owner, so at least you can get a feel for who you're dealing with. If someone's clearly not the owner, maybe that can set up a bit of a red flag and you can be a bit more cautious. But yeah, I think one of the challenges in BC in general with our tenancy law is so much of the time tenants have to be their own champions. There are services like us. We want to be as big as we can. But so often I think there's such a bigger place for regulation and regulation of landlords essentially to get people more comfortable with the marketplace, knowing that they can go into it, look for a place and get something at the end of the day that's fair and legal.
Robert Patterson, we appreciate your time and your expertise. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.